All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Megan Ma, and I'm a fellow at the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. I have the absolute privilege today of moderating this expert panel that will discuss the role of disruptive technologies in the legal and financial systems, particularly in the context of societal impact. So today we'll be spotlighting some advancements in computational law, DeFi, and blockchain, and how these respective technologies are leading the change in the legal space. But before we begin, some introductions for our experts. So to my direct left is Dr. Roland Vogel, a scholar, lawyer, entrepreneur with over 20 years of academic and professional experience in legal informatics, intellectual property, and innovation. Currently, he serves as the executive director of the Stanford program in law, science, and technology, and a lecturer at Stanford Law School. He focuses his efforts on legal informatics as well at our center, and which he co-founded and also leads as executive director. Dr. Vogel is also a visiting professor at the University of Vienna, where he teaches U.S. intellectual property law, and at Bocconi University in Italy, where he teaches computational law. He was named to the American Bar Association Legal Rebels, a highly regarded group of legal innovators, and was previously selected as one of Fast Case 50. Dr. Vogel is also on the board of directors of Marico, LexCheck, IP Nexus, and on the advisory board of LawGood, Lexon, Legal, or Leap IP Rulebooks. Next on the panel, we have Dan Siciliano. He is an independent director and the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco and chair of the American Immigration Council. He is the former faculty director of the Rock Center for Corporate Governance at Stanford University and former professor of practice and associate dean at Stanford Law School. His work has included expert testimony in front of the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. And Professor Siciliano was named to the Directorship 100, a list of the most influential people in corporate governance. Professor Siciliano was also co-founder, CEO, and ultimately executive chairman of LawLogix Group, a highly successful software technology company with many accolades and numerous and highly recognized. Finally, Professor Siciliano is a co-founder and board member of the Silicon Valley Directors Exchange. He is the past president of the League of United Latin American Citizens Council and an active member of the Latino Corporate Directors Association. He's also served as a governance consultant and trainer to the board of directors of dozens of Fortune 1000 companies, including Google, Microsoft, FedEx, and Disney. And last but not least, we have Reuben Youngblum. He researches currency efficiency at the MIT Digital Currency Initiative and is the managing editor of the Crypto Economic Systems Journal and a fellow at Stanford Codex, where he runs the Blockchain Education Initiative and serves as a coordinator for the RegTrack's Blockchain Regulatory Tracking Initiative. He also releases an annual ranking of universities for CoinDesk, evaluating the institution's impact in the blockchain space. His work focuses on the intersection between blockchain and law, and has appeared in a variety of outlets, including the Codex blog, as well as MIT's Computational Law Report. He's an active blockchain developer, contributing to the Ethereum ecosystem, and regularly advises startups on legal and engineering matters. So, without further delay, and with the All-Star panel at hand, let's kick off our session with our first question to Roland. As a pioneer in the field, there is no better person to sort of contextualize our discussion today. So what would you say is the current and projected landscape of legal tech, and more specifically in computational law? And sort of a second part to it is, how do you see their potential to evolve the legal ecosystem?
All right. Hi, I'm Mike. Well, thank you, Megan, and thank you for having us here. So in general, I would say we started Codex about 15 years ago as the center that would sort of concern itself with technology for the legal system, aiming to make the legal system more efficient for all stakeholders, as we like to point out, not just for legal professionals. And in my time at Codex, I've really seen hundreds, if not thousands, of exciting new ideas bringing technology to the legal system. And I think, sort of a broad line distinction that's important to understand is sort of the line between leveraging legal information retrieval technologies like machine learning and natural language processing to do legal things, to identify new patterns in the law, to even make legal predictions, to allow people to predict how a judge will decide a particular case, or to allow a patent prosecutor to optimize his or her arguments as he or she are arguing for a patent to be registered at the patent office, to predictive policing and identifying issues and risks in large bodies of contracts. That's what we use legal information retrieval technologies for. And that's been something that's been going on for many, many years. And there has been sort of a big kind of key moment, I think, in recent years, at least some people would argue that, in these kind of new language models like BERT, GPT, GPT-2, GPT-3, and soon GPT-4. That really sort of advances the possibilities of what we can do with natural language processing, going through large amounts of unstructured legal data. The other side of that distinction is what we call computational law, and by that we mean the automation and mechanization of legal reasoning. So when the first category I mentioned, the legal information retrieval, really helps bring relevant information to human decision makers, okay? Identifying new patterns and bringing that information to human decision makers, usually legal professionals. In comp law, we're automating the process. We don't need the human decision maker anymore. We're building a robo-lawyer, if you wish. And we see that technology has been out in use for many years, too. What's exciting now is the new application areas we're identifying. So you're all probably familiar with TurboTax. That's a classic computational law system in a sense of a system that has a computable representation of the tax code built into it, and it can apply the tax code to the specifics of a particular user. And we see the same approach, this same kind of logic-based, knowledge representation-based, good old-fashioned AI-based approach in other areas today. Legal chatbots to fight traffic tickets or to apply for a visa. Computable contracts is an area that my center has been spending a lot of time on, especially in the insurance context. Over this past year, we've done a deep dive into thinking about how we can make insurance policies computable so that we can do queries that currently are very difficult. So when you try to figure out if next time you go to Hawaii, if your rental car is covered by your mainland insurance or your visa, or you have to purchase the insurance, those are queries that are currently very difficult and you need humans to help you with. And with computational...
Have you found the human that can help us with that? That's my
no,
a practical.
I found a little gecko, that can help you with that. So,
that's the point, I guess. Yeah.
So, and then of course, so that's a really important area, and somewhat, many times people conflate computable contracts with smart contracts on a blockchain. So we're not talking about blockchain applications. For this use case, we don't need the blockchain, although I will say the blockchain has been an important technology in legal tech also, and Reuben's going to enlighten us about that. So I think, I'm not sure I was that responsive to your question, but I was just trying to... It
was a really great overview and really comprehensive, and given us sort of the defining moments and the snapshots of what we want to learn more about. And so from breaking sort of legal terrain, let's now turn to finance. I'm going to give this question to you, Dan. What are the promises of DeFi, and what are some stereotypes we should indeed trust or avoid? And I think just to start off, maybe your definition of DeFi, since maybe those in the audience might have differing ones.
Sure. First, I want to ask the question hanging over us all, which is, who did we offend to have us, the lawyers, slotted after the hard-hitting scientist who gets to talk about robots? So welcome. We're here to talk to you about the law. No, actually, I'm the guy who's going to deviate and talk a little bit about finance and outside the area of law. Your question is sort of a trick question, but let me take a run at it. So first, just to be clear, even DeFi in its best form, whatever future that takes, frictionless, permissionless, beautiful, it still doesn't make pigs fly, right? And so to a certain extent, depending on what you do in your current job on a day-to-day basis, you have to discern between miracles that can never be, and miracles that you actually don't want. And DeFi doesn't create flying pigs, it doesn't reduce the intervention of problems, it doesn't reduce fraud, it doesn't eliminate a lot of stuff, but it does do some impressive things. So I think we have to believe the hype within reason, and I'll tease out maybe 3 things to keep in mind in the mid to short run. So first, decentralized finance, I'm kind of ahead, like it's built on blockchain to a certain extent, obviously. So I'll leave some gaps, but it radically reduces cost and friction, right? And so that enables all sorts of things. You get to have some really cool outcomes. You can do some things that you couldn't really think of before if you can reduce costs in the key things that we have trouble with. And I'll pick a couple things. So pure DeFi, I think right now, is a distraction. What I mean by pure DeFi is automated markets sitting on top of a permissionless system that everything happens without human intervention. 2 thoughts on that. One, pure DeFi and complete permissionlessness is actually not desirable for most people in most situations in most institutions. They kind of talk a good game about it, but then they're like, but wait, what about, and they ask about all sorts of interesting human intervention points, not the least of which is reversibility in case of fraud or error. So the ultimate end of pure DeFi maybe isn't desirable, but much more importantly, if you go with the traditional definition of decentralized finance, which is the application of secure ledgers for the purposes of removing the intermediaries common in financial institutions and transactions, the banks, the financial institutions as they exist now, CeFi, the government, so that you can get money and transactions without all that, that turns out to be generally illegal. The government has a sort of objection when you have things that are attached to real world assets. Now, that's kind of the near future of DeFi, is that DeFi allows you to do something clever and interesting at a very low transactions cost with a lot less friction that you can then slice and dice and scale that you couldn't do that somehow impacts real world assets. So think real estate, think limited partnerships, think, traded securities, think all those things. In a DeFi world, you probably can't get away with it being purely DeFi. But you can have, and if you've heard this phrase, I apologize for making it sound like it's new, you can have DeFi wrapped in CeFi. So you can have centralized finance kind of hugging the decentralized finance, the least of which, for example, by and large, you have to have, AML and KYC. If you don't have Know Your Client, if you don't have anti-money laundering, no matter where you are or what you do, someone's going to knock on your door and they're going to be very upset. They'll have both a clipboard and a gun, and it'll go badly for you that day. So you can't just have pure DeFi. So what does that imply? One, derivatives, forgive this, I don't know how many of you are pure finance side. I spent most of my early decade or two here in the econ department. Derivatives are like one of the most important modern wonders of the world, but they got kind of a bad rap, broadly speaking, in the Great Recession. So derivatives drive a lot of what makes what we like about the modern world, and it makes it happen. And yet, you are cautioned in part for lots of different reasons, but one of which is that derivatives have what we might call an attenuation problem, right? So what you're looking for in any functioning space is price revelation, market formation for buyers and sellers, reconciliation, settlement, and then insurance for all the above. Well, a lawyer will tell you, and the finance person, the CFO person sitting next to them, that if you start describing this complex derivative, they get nervous once you've gotten to your 5th hop, and you're like, and then we'll look at the spot price of crude oil, and then we'll compare that to the non-spot price, plus we'll take a little bit of the diamond price and we'll mix it in with gold, and then we'll have this wonderful output. And the lawyer starts to get all green and scared, and the CFO kind of just leaves the room. One of the reasons they do that is because of a problem we will call attenuation. So attenuation, in part, is the idea that if you have to go from point A to point B to point C to point D, and it's all contractually tied together, and you got to add stuff up and sum things up and double check if B is greater than D and then go back to E, it's a mess unless you can string it together either on a secured ledger or on blockchain purely and kind of run it in an automated fashion. It's just a fancy way of saying if you invented the stock market now or any derivatives exchange, you would not settle on paper, you would not settle at the end of the day, you would not have floats that don't reconcile, you would do it instantly every day and someone would press a button and you'd get a magical nav essentially of something that has 8 parts and 4 contingencies and you'd wrap it up. You can almost do that with computational contracts. Like insurance contracts are a sort of derivative, right? It requires an event, an outcome, there's a payment. None of us know the answer to that car rental thing for sure, and it's a shame because the tech exists to do that with computational contracts. It doesn't even take blockchain. But the DeFi future that's really interesting is if you can deconstruct things that get in your way because of attenuation. So think oracles, right? So oracle, fancy word for input of critical information. I love I love DeFi and blockchain where they're like, there's this idea, and you're like, yeah, that's been around for 100 years. You're just calling it something new. To automate oracles and inputs and to validate them and have an output would allow you to do things that you can't do now. I'll mention two and then I'll stop. So you're probably familiar with the shared equity space in homeownership, right? So there's like HomeTap, and I'm trying to, I know a few, like Splitteroo, Unison, HomeTap. You might be familiar with like the unicorn lending space, so employees who are fully vested with their options, a big unicorn company, it's illiquid, it's private. There's Quid, SecFi, EquityB. These are all using an LP-GP structure. There's a GP, raises money, deploys these investments, you share upside in a home and you give people cash, or you kind of buy sort of options, and get shares for a particular unicorn. And it's in the structure. It has terrible limitations, cool ideas, but it's illiquid for the duration of the fund, generally speaking. It doesn't really have a NAV. There's events, like any asset that increases over time, more or less, or is expected to, is temporarily illiquid, but later will be liquid, is hard to deal with. But think like a billionaire. Billionaires take their real estate holdings and they slice and dice them into at least 5 value streams, and they can sell stuff, they can do prepaid variable forward contracts, they do all this stuff, because at scale, the $150,000 or $200,000 of legal fees, not a big deal. DeFi plus blockchain executed correctly plus legal innovation allows you to do that kind of thing with like home ownership, and it allows you to solve all sorts of other problems like on the other side. So full disclosure, I have a strong interest in this company. There are a bunch of companies, one of which is called Nickel, for example, that solves this in a tokenized strategy. If you take a token, you create a market, and it's a true security token, and you plant it on top of these assets, the legal structure exists. It was the friction of slicing and dicing that created the huge problem. So the thing to believe in, well, the thing not to believe in is you can't change the laws of physics and pigs won't fly just because you have DeFi. But what you might believe in the meantime is before you get to perfect DeFi, you can drive down lots of costs, transactions costs, and you can do things with kind of inefficient assets that you could never do before by solving all sorts of problems. The example, by the way, on the home thing is the following. People don't enter these contracts with HomeTap and others because within 7 to 10 years, you have to reconcile. You have to pay back the money. If you're not going to sell your house, you hire an appraiser, they hire an appraiser. People get queasy. If you do it over a perpetual pool of contracts and you tokenize it, as long as it's big enough, you don't care if they pass it on to their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren, because in the distributed curve of homeownership, some people will sell in a year, some people will sell in 3, the median will be 4.2, and some people won't sell for 100 years, but you don't care because you can trade the token as the investor on the implied present value of the future cash flows. That's what we do for shares. No one says, when will Intel liquidate their goddamn holdings? Like, I need that money. Of course you don't care. Intel's not going to liquidate. You trade that share on the present value of its future cash flows, right? You can't do that for a lot of assets. DeFi will let you. And I think that's the big future.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Dan.
What's that? Sorry, that was my 9-minute talk in 5.5, so.
I think Dan always has this ability to I was trying to kind of lower the hype on DeFi, and he manages to kind of turn it around and make it even more exciting, I guess. So let's not slow this train down. There seems to be quite an ebb and flow when it comes to the excitement around blockchain. In light of today's conference, blockchain technology has frequently been raised as a sort of key tool in fighting climate crisis. So Reuben, this one's for you. What would you advise are some practical uses or important adoptions of blockchain in the next 5 years, particularly at the intersection of climate and environmental law?
Yeah, so thanks, Megan. That's a really great question. What I like about that question is that it really touches on a lot of what blockchain is, but maybe more importantly, carves out a lot of things that blockchain is not. So when we're talking about the intersection of climate and blockchain, I think I would probably be remiss if I didn't talk about something that's happening right now in the blockchain ecosystem. And so I think the last poll that happened was pretty successful, so maybe I'll try to run my own here. How many people here have heard of Bitcoin? That is, okay, that's, I guess, both more and less than I thought. So second question, how many people have heard of Ethereum? More somehow. That's interesting. Okay, so I think it sounds like most people know Bitcoin is a digital currency that has sort of a contentious relationship with the environment. It's secured by a process called proof of work. that uses computations to underpin the security of the ledger that tracks where everybody's value is stored. And so you can imagine with a network that is as large as Bitcoin, where we can get this many people in a room and 80 to 90% of you have heard of Bitcoin, the amount of computation you have to do to really secure that network is enormous. So right now, the Bitcoin network, and it fluctuates quite a bit, but it's using energy that's roughly equivalent to what's being used by Ukraine every year to secure the network, which is a lot. So Bitcoin is the largest cryptocurrency right now by a pretty considerable margin. The second largest is called Ethereum, and that's the one that is going through a little bit of an upheaval right now. So what Ethereum is doing is it historically has used a proof of work consensus mechanism similar to Bitcoin, but it's currently transitioning into not a new consensus mechanism, but new for the Ethereum network called proof of stake. And proof of stake has a lot of goals. It purports to have better security, better scalability, but the main conversation point has been that it uses 99, maybe 99.5% less energy than the Bitcoin network. So this is a great time to have this conversation because it's happening. It's kind of in progress already. It's happening really any day now. Maybe within a week is what they project. That's obviously, we'll see what happens if there are bugs. It might take a little longer. But that's going to be a tremendous test for the Ethereum network and for blockchain in general. So going back to maybe how blockchain as a technology interfaces with climate. There are a couple different ways to think about this. So one is obviously the impacts. We just talked about that, Bitcoin and Ethereum, and with all the currencies out in the world, it can have a pretty sizable impact on the climate. But what's maybe more interesting is the use of blockchain technology in fighting climate change, or at least tracking what's happening. And I really like talking about this because there are a lot of different layers with which you can approach this question. So one layer is the payments layer in terms of how people are actually using this technology. It's probably the most intuitive. People think of Bitcoin, well, I think a lot of people think of Bitcoin as an investment vehicle. It really is designed to be a permissionless way to transact and store value. It's meant to be payment rails. And so Bitcoin is a very natural fit for paying people when you might not have explicit permissions to do so, or especially in the case of a project in Africa that is leasing solar panels and generating electricity in that way, and using Bitcoin to send payments across borders, where maybe that's not something that doesn't get the government very excited, or the people that control those borders. The idea of having a permissionless payment network that retains its value, sometimes better than the local currency, is incredibly powerful. Another layer here is the data layer. So blockchain is usually used synonymously with Bitcoin. A lot of people think of them, and now Ethereum, people think of them as the same. Really what blockchain technology is a highly secure, decentralized ledger. And so the Bitcoin network leverages this affordance, and it says, how can we track things like coin values? How can we track where the flow of money is going? But you can really track anything in these ledgers. And so people have started to realize that in the last couple years. And one use of blockchain technology that people have sort of hit upon in the fight against climate change is maybe we can use this as a way to add transparency and accountability to the way that we store climate data. So there are projects that are out there now putting things like the Paris Accord on the blockchain. They're trying to say, what happens if we connect all of the world's carbon accounts and make sure that as we're moving towards this goal, we have more immutability in the data history, we have more transparency, and we have more accountability in terms of how we're approaching this problem. So these are all very practical ways to look at blockchain. But what really excites me about blockchain is what's happening at the social level, especially around the fight for climate change. So all of these things that I'm describing right now are instantiations of blockchain's impact, or are instantiations of things that blockchain has actually built in the world. But really what blockchain did, and I'll use Bitcoin as an example here as the first blockchain, is it found a way to reach consensus in a highly adversarial environment. And arguably, there is no environment that's more adversarial than finance, right? Everybody kind of wants that resource, and there's a huge incentive to try to manipulate what happens in a financial ecosystem. But climate data is pretty close in terms of how adversarial we should be thinking about it. So I think as we move forward over the next couple years, what's going to be really interesting is how we take the lessons that we learn from blockchain in terms of how we approach society, in terms of what immutability and the ability to operate in an adversarial environment, how we take those and apply those to the climate fight. I think that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Reuben. And what I really liked about your response was actually it's very cautious, which leads me to sort of my next question before we open it up to the audience. And this question is going to be open to the entire panel. So we've spoken about quite a lot of positives of all of this new and emerging technology, but one thing we all know is that there are potential risks to their use. So what would you all say are some important red flags that organizations and industries should be aware of that are especially looking to accelerate the adoption of these technologies that we've talked about?
Okay, well, I would say on the information retrieval technologies, the black box algorithms is, of course, a big issue. We many times don't know when these algorithms operate through different functions and different layers, how certain outputs and decisions are made, and that's a big concern, especially in a legal setting, right? You can't say, well, this person is, 70% likely to become a reoffender, and therefore he should be let out on bail. And in the insurance context, similarly, you might be paid back, you might not be paid back. Depends on what the algorithm says. So this desire for explainable algorithms continues to be a hot topic, also in legal use cases. And I think another issue is the issue of the technology haves and have-nots. There's, in legal settings, it wouldn't be, we care a lot about fairness and coming to the right conclusions. It doesn't seem fair that, big organizations, big companies have all the tools to predict how a certain judge will decide a case, and the other party may not have the same access to those tools. At the same time, I will say there are projects out there so one of the issues in legal is also that certain institutions have a tremendous backlog. For instance, the Brazilian Supreme Court has millions of cases of backlog, and they developed an algorithm that helps them automatically go through the backlog and decide one specific question, which is whether an actual case exists that raises important social question that the Supreme Court will hear. And so if you come to this from a sort of Brazilian context, where people normally have to wait at least 10 years to have their cases heard, and that seems a tremendous, people start losing their belief in institutions, right? And they're losing their trust in the rule of law when institutions make you wait so long for a decision. That's really where I think algorithms can, and so automatic decision making can help. Yeah. Anyways.
Anyone else on the panel?
Sure, I can throw out a few. So one context is to realize that a lot of this stuff reduces frictions, right? So we try to reduce transactions costs, reduce frictions, we make things flow faster, better, easier. But that's when you realize that, especially in areas of finance, I'm sure in other areas as well, but in finance, the friction and the pacing that results from friction is actually often used as a backstop to augment or maybe even substitute on a bad day for judgment and discretion. And when you remove the friction and when the pacing speeds up or disappears entirely, you sometimes realize that there's not a lot of discretion, there's not a lot of judgment, you end up with problems. So the best example I would give is a potential issue, and we have a version of it underway, but I think it could get a lot bigger. So in the DeFi world, your ability to leverage is everywhere, right? In part because it's not regulated consistently, and in part because just the very nature of it, you can daisy chain leverage. You can borrow here and then borrow there and like daisy chain it up. Well, one way to make things go in a way unexpectedly, and good or bad, often bad, is to allow people to do things faster and more readily than they ever did at scales both small and large. So take Robinhood, for example. A remarkable innovation, like it's increasing wealth in a way, not money-wise, by reducing transactions costs and making something almost, remember public goods, non-rival in consumption, non-excludable. So if you can make something non-rival that was rival before, so ice cream, completely rival. I eat half of it, your half is gone, you only have half left. A non-rival good is kind of in the middle. Language is the opposite, pure network effect, right? If I'm the only one, it doesn't do any good. So Robinhood was an invention and a technology application that allowed everybody to do transactions and things at fractions and at pace for little cost, effectively. But it allowed for a lot of activity. You throw in leverage, and you end up, and Robinhood didn't have this problem per se, but I'm applying the same idea to DeFi. You throw in leverage, and then you radically increase risks of both contagion to the broad financial system, but also just surprise outcomes. And an example in DeFi that is unique to DeFi and permissionless systems and current emerging exchanges and some wonderful protocols, there's an old joke in CDOs. No one says CDO anymore, I know. You're not supposed to say that after 2011. But in a collateralized debt obligation, the old joke was, the only thing worse than a non-performing counterparty is a counterparty who performs exactly to the exact expectation in terms of the parameters of the contract, but in a way you never imagined or anticipated. And that is uniquely a problem that pops up in DeFi all the time, which is what you often read of as a hack is actually oftentimes an exploitation. And it's an exploitation that because you can repeat something costlessly 1,000,000 times, or you can iterate, or you can do a chain of events that if you had to have lawyers and paper would take 5 days and $5,000, but you can do it in an instant and it doesn't cost anything, that you get complete conformity to the permissions in the system, but it's like having a counterparty who said, and I will, comma, send the note to delete it all. It's like, whoa, no, that comma, no, and then you duke it out in the courts over the, oops, that comma didn't mean what you thought it meant. In DeFi, you don't have as much opportunity to do that, and you end up with stunningly surprising outcomes. Frictionless, fast to move, scalable, costless for iteration, and specificity that humans aren't really good at. Like, we aren't good at chaining together 10 if-thens and finding the one little thing that lets me repeat that and suck $7 out 1,000,000 times a minute. And suddenly you're drained of all your liquidity, as an example recently. So that would be the unexpected thing. Throw leverage into that, and then we're all running for the hills, carrying gold under our armpits. See, I went the other way. Very scary. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
I think Dan brings up a really, really interesting point that definitely pops up in DeFi and has a ton in the past and probably has happened since we've been up here. I'm sure some other project has been exploited for millions of dollars. But this is a problem that really plagues computing systems in general. It's that ability to execute and that tendency to execute in very, very literal ways that humans just aren't good at kind of predicting. But I want to go one step further and say, okay, outside of the DeFi ecosystem and in blockchain more broadly, what does that mean? So I kind of sat up here and gave my spiel about blockchain, how it might help with the climate. I'm glad that, Megan, you picked up on some caution there because there's definitely a little bit of caution. But I'm really interested in what blockchain can do, and I'm more concerned about maybe some of the problems that arise. So I think that I sat here and kind of said, well, there are a lot of good things that come out of crossing blockchain and the fight for the climate, right? So I said things like transparency, and one thing that I said a few times was immutability. And that's a really interesting concept, this idea that you can have a database that you put things in that can't really be changed without a tremendous amount of resources or computation. And you can sell it as a really good thing, right? Especially in the context of climate. You can say, well, nobody can tamper with the data. You can call it tamper-proof, right? And that kind of has connotations of this is a really good thing. But there are definitely some reasons why immutability is bad. One example is in DeFi. When you have a huge exploit, when it's something that nobody really expects and the people that are hurt are, as happens a lot, retail investors, immutability really throws some wrenches in the system. And to some extent, maybe that's how it was designed to work. There's some amount of a buyer beware kind of philosophy here. But as we get beyond the DeFi ecosystem a little bit, there are examples of attacks on blockchain systems that really do rely on immutability. So One example is a couple years ago, somebody was attacking a blockchain that is separate from Bitcoin called Bitcoin Cash. And they did that by putting explicit, kind of obscene, illegally obscene images on the blockchain, which now are there forever, and it would be so costly to remove them as to be impossible. So there are a lot of questions about whether a lot of these affordances of blockchain are actually as good as we can kind of present them to be in some
An unerasable graffiti wall. I hadn't contemplated that. That's
Okay, Dan has some ideas now.
Okay, well, since we've gotten the signal, we've heard, a couple of sort of cautious words, especially sort of what the role of friction is. We're also, which I actually personally really like because I study language, actually. And we've also heard about biases, misinterpretation, interpretation of statistical outcomes. And so kind of opening up to the audience, since this is a bit of a teaser, sort of, we're now kind of taking questions. So we're turning it over to you.
Over there.
This is kind of a boring question. Dan, I think it was you that mentioned that some of these, using DeFi infrastructure to move physical assets is actually illegal. That made me think of having to buy our cars through car dealers in some states. What actually is the legal theory that makes that illegal? I'm just curious what.
Yeah, and it's overly broad. Like, I'm the least lawyerly of all of us. Like, I taught finance at Stanford Law School as a professor, so keep that in mind. A couple of reasons. So let's take US jurisdictions. So if you actually have an asset or something that connects to an asset and you're paying money for it or you're selling it to someone and getting money for it, it doesn't have to be money. Money's kind of a broad term. If you're receiving any sort of consideration or promise for consideration, it's going to be one of the following things. It's going to either be a security, it's going to be a contract subject to oversight, or it's going to be a loan or some permutation. You almost can't escape one of those three things if it's attached to something real. And then you have local jurisdiction for what we might call settlement. So if I promised you 10% of the future up value of my home, then you either, and you gave me money for that, it's one of a few things. If you did it right, which is hard as a prepaid variable forward contract, then it's a non-taxable event for me, and it's it's not a loan because we don't know when it settles, there's no interest, et cetera. However, if you simply gave me the money and you say you now have an option to take a piece of my future upside and there's a deadline on it, which all these have, I just wrote you a call option, which, by the way, that income's taxable in real time. Watch for the class action lawsuit coming soon, right? So it's going to be very interesting. So there's almost no way in the United States to escape that. And I will tell you, the SEC is imperial. Like, it looks around and says, yeah, that's us too. Ooh, and that one. And heaven forbid you be alone, because you have 51 plus jurisdictions. So pick the SEC is my advice and get good lawyers. Sorry.
Any other questions? One more question.
Yep. My name is Sherman Williams, AI and Ventures. You talked about some of the innovations happening, like the merge with Ethereum, et cetera. What about the movement potentially to directed acyclic graphs, so DAGs, versus just using the blockchain? Are you seeing any innovations in that space and seeing that coming?
Good question.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. So a lot of what we're talking about here, I would say maybe more especially what Dan and I are talking about. I personally study blockchain technology. I think Dan is pretty steeped in the blockchain world as well. But this is really just, this technology really just serves as the substrate for what it is that we're trying to do. So there are a lot of different ways to accomplish this. I think DAGs were mentioned. It's a different way of graphing out all the connections between various nodes. There are ways to do it that involves more technological sentinels that people are working on. But when we talk about things like DeFi, when I talk about immutable ledgers or decentralized ledgers to help with the climate fight, I talk about blockchain because that is my perspective, that's my point of view, but there are a lot of other technologies that are as good, if not better in some cases, for accomplishing these tasks. So it's really important to keep in mind that tribalism is not helpful here. We do need to be thinking about what is the best technology for the job and make sure that we're using it appropriately and leveraging it safely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, panelists.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.